Thank you for joining us from wherever it is that you're joining us in whichever time zone and climate zone you're in. We really appreciate you taking the time. My name is Shreyasi Singh. I'm one of the founding partners of J3, which is a strategic consulting and implementation firm. We are focused on education, and we help trustees, philanthropists, and boards build and scale their institutional offerings and their academic programs. At J3, one of the things that we're always very, very excited about and passionate about is trying to surface interesting insights around different stakeholders, different constructs, and different contexts in education, largely in India, which is our focus, but always with a global lens. We had launched a similar report called the Faculty Work-Life Report earlier this year, which was really taking a look at what we think is the most important asset in the higher education system, which is faculty. This time we're training our focus and our lens on school education. One of the things that's fascinating is me and my partners, we constantly meet school operators, school builders, people trying to set up new schools and institutions. And one of the phrases that always comes up is we are very student-centered, right? That's something that we hear over and over again, that, we're doing this because we're student-centered. We really wanted to put that belief that I think a lot of institutional leaders have and school leaders have on being student-centered to see really is the sync between the student as well as the teacher and the parents, the two critical adult stakeholders that the student has. Are they truly in sync? Are the adults really student-centered? And do we really even know what are the most important themes that we should be student-centered in? Really trying to unpack that, what we've done over the last 3 months is have gone out to more than 3,000 respondents, more than 1,200, 1,300 students, parents of those particular students, as well as teachers, administrators, and school leaders, to try and see where the student sync is in and how much in sync teachers, leaders, and parents are with their students. Putting all of that together, I'm really, really delighted that we are launching what we're calling the Student Sync Index 2026, where we have really unpacked 8 strands or 8 parameters which are important parameters on trying to figure out where the sync lies. You will see the link to go and download this report. From. I'd love for you to read it. We would love some feedback and see how you can. And really just to launch the report, I thought what better than to obviously have a conversation with 3 people whose work I really admire and who we follow at J3 to see what they do and who know a lot about school education. So I'm really delighted to have sort of this panel to discuss some findings of the report, but really to understand what's happening in school education. The panelists also haven't got too much access to the findings now, so we will have a broader conversation. I'm not going to walk you all through the report. It's a 50-page report in any case, and I think you'd probably be better off going through that at your own leisure. So we'll have the conversation around the report, but really lean into the experience that our 3 incredible panelists have. Thank you so much, Vikas, Tanak, and Trista for joining us today. We really appreciate your support in helping us launch the Student Sync Index 2026 at J3 and can't wait for all of you to finally go through the report in detail. Trista and Kanak are school operators. Trista obviously runs these really admirable institution called the AKIA Schools out of Bangalore. She's also the provost of CMR University, as well of several institutions in the CMR group. I think what I really admire about Trista, despite all, in addition to all her incredible, educational experience and, how much time and effort she spent on training herself to be an education leader through her education, but really is the new interesting models of school education that she's coming up with, AKIA Nava, and AKIA for focused on the nature. So very, very excited to dig into and understand some of the innovative models from her. Kanak, obviously, I think if there's someone you know in school education in Kanak, it's Kanak, one of the three most critical people in school K-12 education system in India. Really has an incredible vantage point since he runs nearly 60 schools across, I think, 30 odd cities and catering to more than 50,000 students in tier 2, tier 3 cities. You know, that kind of experience on the ground is super rich. Thank you so much, Kanak, for joining us. And then, of course, we have Vikas Kota, someone I really gotten to admire just from the incredible work he does with the world's best school prize, where not just the principals and school directors of the schools that win share that news. Ministers of education, prime ministers, and presidents of the country the school is in are sharing their excitement and their honor at getting one of the world's best school prize. He also runs an incredible summit of some of the top school chains in Abu Dhabi every November, and runs a fascinating and very powerful, useful forum that I think Krista and I are both lucky to be part of, called the Education Leaders Forum. So really somebody who understands education in general, but certainly school education and global school education across the world with great depth. So, you know, couldn't have asked for a better panel. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to jump right into it. Let's get to the talking, and I can stop talking and all of you can come in. You know, I'm just going to surface 5 of the most interesting insights that struck out at me from this report, right? There's so many things. And let's begin with the first one. I think for me, one of the most striking figures in this report is 31% of students say they don't find their school time useful at all. I mean, that is an incredibly hard number to ignore. When you hear this, what do you think students are really telling us about how school fits or doesn't fit into their lives today? And does this number strike you as much or hits out at you as much as it does to me? I'm going to start with the school owners. Krista, maybe you, and then Kanak, and we'll come to you, Vikas, after that.
Thank you, Sheshi. I think that number is not surprising. In fact, I would expect it to be much higher because schools are such dynamic environments. We have to innovate all the time, and keeping pace with what kids need, whether it's emotional well-being, the way the curriculum is structured, the way a teacher meets the student at where they are, how much time they spend on different activities. I think there's a lot of gap that needs to be looked at and continuously to be looked at. So it's not surprising at all.
Wow, I actually had expected a different answer that you would, because I was really surprised because it seems like a really large. But Kanak, what about you?
Thanks, Tracy. So the number is definitely it's alarming. I think it's a call to all of us to relook at as to what we do at school. What is the kind of purpose that we are existing for? Because if the most important stakeholder, which is the child, which is the student, which is the center of our being, does not find value in what we are doing, then definitely an alarming number. Am I surprised by it? I go with Rista. I'm not very surprised because this is something that we've been talking about for a couple of years now. That are we relevant? Are we adding value? And it has nothing to do with AI. It has nothing to do with access. It has all to do with I guess conditioning of our educators at the school levels. We've been talking about it, so no, not surprised, but alarming for sure. Definitely a wake-up call to all educators to actually look into the purpose, the processes all over again. Reset button needed.
Vikas, your opening thoughts on this, and come in a little bit to sort of compare and contrast this with any patterns that you're seeing in other parts of the world, or is this a universal experience? I just want to double click on the fact that the schools and the students that we polled were really India's premium private schools. They were all upwards of 3 lakh per annum school fees, and many were upwards of 5 lakh per annum school fees. So they are really the ones which are peers of global benchmarks. And so therefore, Vikas, your global lens on this would be really useful if this is a universal experience.
I start off by saying thank you for this kind invitation to join your call today. And also I'm a huge fan of Trista's work and obviously of Kanak's as well. I'll start by talking about, well, when it comes to student engagement, we know that in many education systems, there's a huge built-in focus on grades or cramming for exams or on academic achievement. It's how we learned when I was at school. And even though there's a growing recognition that schools are about far more than just passing exams and a greater focus on developing children holistically and skilling them for a world they'll enter, the traditional methods of learning and testing remain core today. But there is a gap here in how students experience this, and it may be causing a crisis in student engagement. My good friend Rebecca Winthrop, who is director of the Center for Universal Education at Brookings Institution, examined this in her new book, The Disengaged Teen, which I have a copy here of, by the way. Her work shows that in primary school, around 75% are engaged in their learning. But by the time they reach high school, this has fallen off a cliff to 25%. Technology is obviously partly to blame, but it didn't begin with mobile phones in schools. The big factor they identify is relevance. We need to teach core academic subjects. We need to teach reading, writing, and mathematics. But unless we can make this relevant to children's experiences, in the light of the real world, children see around them, then many will switch off. Taking students out of the classroom and getting them into the real world to enhance their learning can really improve their engagement. It's something that I've seen in many of the schools that have excelled in the World's Best School Prizes. Here the gaps between what adults have designed and what students experience is smallest. And when that happens, you truly can inspire students. And as a note, I do want to talk about Trista Zekia School in Bangalore as an example of being a great example of that in the way that she's thought through their model. And so that is my comment on this particular question you pose.
Yeah, and just to come in, and I'm going to take the second insight that really struck out at me and was disillusioning and alarming in some way, was, all three of you mentioned student engagement, right? And that you're not being surprised in it, of course, being a challenge in how we design schools, how we run them, and what happens really in the time the students spend in school. One of the things that I think, one of the beliefs that many of us have, and I think many education leaders certainly have, is extracurriculars is the right way for engagement, that getting people to engage outside of academic and core curriculum is the way to increase and enhance engagement and help students find something that they're passionate about. Actually, the Student Sync Index actually found that there is a huge amount of participation, right, in extracurricular, but many students and parents find them to be almost irrelevant in true agency and impact, right? So if that is true, the one greatest lever that we thought would lead to engagement also seems to be broken. Trista, when you're setting up new schools then, what are you doing differently? And how are you then thinking differently about engagement if even your biggest go-to engagement tactic isn't working?
I think multiple levers can be used. And it's not easy only because you're catering to so many different kind of students, different backgrounds, different mindsets, different expectations. They might be learning at a different pace at that day. So it's so difficult to then find something that fits everybody at the convenience of the school structure that's the teacher is capable of doing. So there are a lot of limitations to even designing engagement. But some ways that are possible and are being explored are definitely personalization, maybe making smaller cohorts of interest-based cohorts are possible. And I think AI will open up a whole new avenue of personalization and opportunities and maybe courses that students can pick based on their desire and their passion versus what's being forced upon them by adults or what the system puts on them. So I think schools always need to think about what can I do differently? How can I cater to my children who are changing all the time in a way that's scalable and implementable?
Kind of given sort of your vantage point of running so many schools, right, and some of them being very large schools, where this personalization point is tough to now get, it's challenging to build that in when you're already at scale. And I'm guessing, and this is a guess that I'm taking, Krista, that maybe it's easier to build it in right from the word go, because then you design systems around it. Kanak, are there any best practices or any tricks or any things that you can share with us that has worked in one of your many schools in really being able to address the student engagement, lack of extracurricular involvement, helping with engagement at all? I think it's also important for us to focus on some of the things that hopefully can be scaled, not just in your own institutions, but institutions across the world and the country.
Yeah. So, the extracurricular being extra is a big problem that's there at most of the schools. You need to integrate it in everything that you do, right? Like, and strongly we believe that it's not just about the academic achievement of a child. It's very easy for us to say that, let the child follow their passion. Like, passion is a very overrated word thrown around very easily nowadays, right? Like, you need to give them experiences so that they discover their passion, not the other way around, that the child can follow their passion at school. We strongly believe that we cannot have a multi-cuisine restaurant type offering to the child on the fancies and the whims of the parents. I think that's not how it works. You need to have research processes. You need to understand that academia and the extracurricular co-curricular activities, as we generically say it, can coexist and they can be intertwined. You cannot have them in isolation. That is the first big thing that we did. So you're bang on right that when you start a new school, it's probably easier to set that expectation, to counsel, to orient the parents as well, because at the start of a child's journey at a school, the parent is a more important decision maker. So to orient the parents is very important. Look, we also understand that parents of today are the kids of 80s, 90s, 2000s. Their conditioning is very different to the conditioning of the children of today. Their aspirations are very different. So a lot of us talk about that, there is too much focus on marks and we need to drop that. Well, the parents need to be educated about that. It's not their fault that they come from that conditioning. They understand that. So therefore, more engagement with the parent at the starting phase of a school makes a lot of difference. What we've done is that we've given children infinite opportunities to take part through through cohorts, through club activities, and we've intertwined a lot of academic activities as well as the sports or the cultural activities as part of the school learning experience. We are trying to move away from marks. I'm not going to say that we are not focused on that, but we are working very, very hard towards it. The most important thing that we've done is that we've had very honest conversations with two important stakeholders, which is the parent and the teachers, about this. We've tried to groom our teachers accordingly. It's good for us to say this on a panel, right? Like, this is what I believe in. But if you don't practice it at ground level, and I work in tier 2, tier 3 cities of India, cities that growing up I did not know existed in India. And I'm very proud of the kind of schools that we've built at these places. Initially, there was always a trouble economically, right? Like, economics will need to make sense, where parents wanted us to focus on marks and remove the extracurricular activities, but want a very fancy infrastructure. That does not suffice the purpose of the school. What suffices the purpose of the school would be, how do you engage the children? How do you give them experiences? That is what leads to the overall development of the students. So as best practices, we've integrated all of it as one. And, the onus or the agency of making the timetable, choice, etc. We give experiences to the students, but the agency is on the child as to how they want to take it forward. So timetable making, etc., comes to the child. It's not to the school alone. So that's made a lot of difference.
Got it. So I think kind of even our data show that participation, and I think kind of, really expanding the menu of options. So each child, each student finds something that they can be attracted towards and participate in. I think schools have done a good job of increasing that option menu and getting participation. We found that 77% of the students did say that they participate. I think the alarming and disturbing numbers were only 22% thought it was useful in any manner, either for skill building or for engagement. So I think it might have to sort of the next level of true impact and purposes where I guess, your struggle and challenges lie. Because tell us a little bit about the World's Best School Prize. And the focus really is is there a way for measuring, right? When you have separate categories, and double click on the ones where categories are under engagement and extracurriculars or integrated co-curricular, or whichever is the right word, the phrase for us to use. How do you actually go and test that? How do you measure that? In nomination forms, what are teachers saying that stand out to you?
Thank you for asking that question. I set up the World's Best School Prizes because one realization that I had during COVID in particular was, we just need better learning institutions. That's the first thing. And the world deserves that, and we need to be doing a lot more. And when I reflect upon my times traveling around the world, I'd always go to a great school. I'd always meet a great teacher. And the question is, why aren't there more? And so as I started like double tapping, as you said, on this subject, I started thinking about, well, the field of school improvement is very well established, actually. We have enough evidence and research that talks about what makes a great school. And so the question is, why don't we have more? Like, if we know what works, why is it that these things don't take root? And so I started at first just putting schools together just from my own network. I said, let's take, for example, Trista School in Bangalore, put it together with school in London and say, okay, why don't you talk about how you are so damn good? And all of a sudden you'll find this exchange happening, which I thought was really valuable about best practices. And that transference of knowledge was very powerful. So I went away and I started thinking about, well, going to a Trista and another person somewhere in the world is like pulling teeth out of a lion's mouth, actually, especially to talk about best practice. So is there a better way of doing it? And in my previous life, I'd created another prize, which is quite noted. And I thought, okay, maybe we create a prize mechanism to surface best practices from around the world. And we made a long list of 20 areas, which are school improvement strategies, and we chose 5. And these are, schools that are good at community partnership and collaboration. All the evidence showed that they get better learning outcomes. Schools that empower young people to take environmental action do better. Schools that are innovative, and I don't mean just technologically, they do better. Schools that prioritize healthy living, get better learning outcomes. And the last one was schools that know how to build resilience and overcome adversity do better. And so when we create these 5 categories, which are not very marketable, if you think about it, like, how do I excite people around the world saying these are great best practices to put forward? So we came up with a fancy name, called them the World's Best School Prizes. As a result of that, they've just blown up. Over the last 4 years, we've had 10,000 schools from around the world participate in our prizes. And actually, the country with the largest number of nominations and applications is India, I should say, followed by Brazil. And we've had winners from India come through every year, actually. We've had 3 winners. We've had many finalists come from India. So India has a very fertile ground in terms of just excellence, school excellence. Like, sometimes we have to beat ourselves up, just introspect and say, well, don't be too harsh. You have great schools in the public sector and the private sector. And so your question is like, what is it that we learn through this and how do we assess them? The learning that we've had after so many schools having gone through is that the most critical things that drive high performance in schools come down to leadership. And which is an obvious thing to state, but actually it's in the ambit of something that we all understand and understand the need of promoting, but we don't necessarily have the tools to assess, which are around school culture. And apart, in wider world of work, everyone understands the importance of organizational culture. In schools, the question is, well, okay, what is culture, and how do you assess it? Firstly, and so we've created a tool called Best School to Work to help schools actually assess their culture, and from that process, actually take that journey to excellence. And there's some fundamental questions that come up in our assessment with regards to culture that we have to deal with. But that's the short background as to what we're doing, why we're doing it.
Actually, one of the 8 strands that we double clicked on in the report is on school climate and
Correct.
culture. And I think that's one of the things that, people like Kanak and Trista can take great sort of pride in and sort of comfort for. It's actually one of the parameters on which we found great high sync. In fact, that all the schools that, came up were, parents are all citing safety. I think that's a great kind of foundation. safety and teaching, at least the teaching happens, right? I mean, we work a lot in higher education, so I think we hear very, very different things. But I think at least in India's premium school, a sense of safety, organization and teaching quality is still there, which are really strong foundations to build on. I think lots of interesting questions already coming from the audience. I'm going to take just one sentence response on something that I think Shubhra has said, which I thought was really interesting on this point of extracurriculars. And Kanak, I focused on that as well. That when we try to build towards engagement, could we overwhelm students because the school calendar is ridiculously busy into lots of little things all the time, right? So, this engagement versus overwhelming students, and how do you kind of create different cohorts on high stimulus students who need high stimulus, need less stimulus? Are any of these conversations that you're having?
Can I ask a question
Absolutely.
before you answer?
Yeah.
Before you answer that, kind of,
Yeah.
my question is: are we talking about engagement or agency?
Well,
Say that again.
I think both.
Okay.
Right. So I think it's a very interesting question, and absolutely, students can get overwhelmed. Absolutely, you have to answer that question. Is it the why? As to why are you creating these avenues for students to take part in these activities? If it is to showcase to the parents that you have multiple activities, then the why is not answered, and then you're absolutely overwhelming the students. I found schools where you have a lot of marks for a lot of these activities, a lot of grades going on for these activities, and I think that is where the battle is lost. That is where you're overwhelming the child. That is exactly where you are trying to be the sort of the pleaser for the parents. When you look at it, that this is part of personality development, personality enhancement, or simply an experience for a child, I think it absolutely works. Having a pickleball court or having an axe throwing, just saying it on a lighter note, there are a lot of schools in Gurgaon that have axe throwing happening, which is great. I'm sure it works for them. But I'm sure that the purpose that they would have set it up with would have not been to simply please the parents or have another activity to gauge the students with. So yes, if you grade it, students will get overwhelmed. If you force feed into the school curriculum, students will get overwhelmed. Parents will ask questions and then they will have expectation. Therefore, having that conversation with the parent as to why you're doing this, if it's part of the personality enhancement, it absolutely works. But if you grade it, no, it doesn't work. It will overwhelm the child.
Krista? And then we'll move to parents, the big bad parents, right?
I think before we talk about engagement or agency, the topic of culture and school climate is more foundational for all of these. And that is actually much harder to establish, to nurture, to build over time and continue to maintain that ethos of the school. So I think if we get school culture right, how a child feels when they come into a school, um, how they're treated, how they treat each other, then you can layer anything above that core foundation. And the bigger question is, then how do we set up culture? What does culture really mean? And who really determines that? How does it grow over time? And so I think that's a bigger problem for us to solve.
How have you addressed culture in some of your schools, right? Where do you begin? Do you begin with the school director or the school principal, and really it flows from there, and then you let them do their thing, or?
Yeah, I love this question actually because I love the topic of culture because where I started my first school when I was 23 and I didn't know how to run a school and I had all the right degrees but I didn't know how to do it on the ground. So when I sat back and looked at all of the research and everything that goes on, six key parameters were identified and this is still core to us. One is culture, curriculum, instruction, assessment, environment, and teachers, teaching professional development. So these are sort of six pillars that go in tandem, and culture is the first one because, and so I started with the feeling of how would we like our children to feel, and then we implemented culture toolkits from day one, and we had culture champions. We do culture walks. So it's something that has to be very consciously measured, has to be very consciously set, and willing to relook at it and say, hey, what are we being inauthentic about and what can we do better? So, for example, we follow social contracts in our schools. That's children set their behavior within their class and they have consequences around, and they hold each other accountable to this. Or the way we start a day, how we end a day. These are small culture practices that has to be reinforced every time, and we don't get it right. Sometimes we have to relook at it and say where are we getting lost. So I think that's how we do it, Shayashi. It's not a perfect system, but
No, it never is. At two little points more on students before we go to parents and hopefully we and teachers as well. I think two other strands that we have in the report is around motivation and drive and stress and emotional safety, right? Now, in motivation and drive, and we've talked about assessment, there are comments also from the audience on, how do you assess? How do you take it beyond marks? Kanak, you also mentioned the fact that, that becomes, it's not just, parents. I think what we are seeing even from students is most of them define success externally. Our student respondents said that 67% of them, college admissions was really the purpose of schools. Again, this report was focused much more on grades 9 to 12. So in some ways, it's not surprising. And 59% of students themselves say marks. So I think that culturalization has been quite internalized, whether from society to parents to students, but the fact is students also feel that. But the really alarming, sad data point was only 2% say real life learning. And this is students, is really, what drives them or what motivates them about school. That's, please come in on that. The second thing in that I will also say is on one of the other strands was around stress and emotional safety, where actually we saw a lot of, points of great misalignment, especially between parents and students, where the students are saying that 57% students say they feel stressed weekly and 19% say feel stressed daily. And only 2% feel very comfortable approaching teachers. Yet 42% of parents, 1 in 2 parents, believe their children are immune to peer pressure, right? So I think on both motivation and performance, where there's actually great sync between the parents and students, because everybody wants great marks and great college admissions, and real life learning is deprioritized by parents and students as well. But great moment of kind of, misalignment between students and parents on stress. So how do we even begin to, think about some of these? And is any of this, because India has always been this marks culture, although US college admissions is as much of an arms race as, IITs and, the Indian system is this thing on just outcome for the next career phase, which is school college admissions? Is this really where all high quality schools and all our best philosophies come to die?
What a great question. I think I don't want to comment on India because you have two operators here who will talk about it. I think the more important thing to focus on is what people call purpose-driven education, right? And in our World's Best School Prizes, we have plenty of examples of schools that come through that focus on the link between what happens in schools and what's happening out there in society. There's one particular school that comes to my mind straight away, and they won our prize for environmental action this year, which is a school called the Arbor School in the UAE, actually. And what they've done is that they've integrated eco-literacy into the curriculum to develop critical thinkers and problem solvers through real-world projects that tackle waste reduction, energy efficiency, and other environmental challenges. And, it's embedding sustainability, ethical stewardship into its learning model, and is a direct response to the critical role that education does play in addressing ecological challenges. And beyond the classroom, it's done a lot as well. And so all I'm trying to say to you is that I think there's a lot more going on in the world than just the pursuit of grades. I think that's what I'm trying to answer this question with. And actually, Trista's new school is another example of that in India, where again, she sees a massive need to tackle this sustainability agenda, and she has students captive during the day for her school. and she will turn them into eco warriors. And I think that's what the world needs. And I think that's what parents are demanding more and more.
But we're finding they're not, right, Vikas and Kanak and Crystal.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this, and if I was to be cynical and say a lot of this is virtue signaling again for the common application US undergrad system, right? Is the purpose always next career progression rather than real life learning? And us have students also bought into that, Kanak and Trista, where they're focused on marks and being most motivated by both marks and college admissions? And is it okay too? Because I mean, in a way, should we even judge that? Maybe it's fine. Maybe we need to realize that that's human psychology. We want to progress. We want to get the best next option. And for that, let's not be too evangelical about trying to change a system which we can't, and just respond to it and meet its demands. Kanak?
So I'm so happy that we're talking about the good stuff, right? Like we talk about culture, we talking about purpose, climate, conditioning of people. I think that makes a lot of difference everywhere. You walk into any of our schools, and the reason I keep using the word conditioning is that if you walk into any of our schools, we are not the stereotypically well-behaved school students, right? Like, there's no finger on the lips, one arm distance, as a lot of students would have grown up, a lot of parents would have grown up with. You see a lot of agency in the students. And we've seen that students who've been with us right from the start, their understanding of as to how the world functions, what they want from life is very different to students who would have joined us and in later grades. And there's nothing wrong about it, right? Like you said, if they have that interest towards securing good grades, which our students do get, but then also having that holistic understanding that our students have always had, that is where the purpose makes all the difference. Geography also plays a very important role, Shaisi. Like, we have set processes, I think, so like, Trista was talking about the culture aspect. We are governed by SPICE. SPICE is an acronym that stands for sustainability, possibility, integrity, collaboration, and empathy. And this is what sort of is the hygiene that defines a lot of our schools. Now, when it comes to sustainability, for example, it means something very different in a Kanpur and a Bahraich than it means in a Delhi and a Gurgaon. The identification of the problems at local levels and finding solutions, that agency that we've given to our students, that is making a difference in these places. But the core remains pretty much the same. When we started talking about these things, we were laughed at, absolutely made fun of, that these are the softer aspects. You have to give the technical skills and the coding skills to the students. How are they going to get jobs in banks? How are they going to go to the IITs and the IIMs or to the US universities? How is all of that going to happen? But I think I'm happy that we stuck by it. We said that we want to create a culture of lifelong learners. We want to give them agency, but we also want to give them sanskar and sanskriti. I think that has made a lot of difference to the students. We are seeing the results now 35 years later, but like you said, we had that scale and we had that opportunity. We are seeing that shift happen in tier 2, tier 3 India now. Well, I'm happy to see all of that. But the starting point has to be that firm belief and getting on board the other stakeholders, sort of your principal, your teachers, your administrators. You have to take them on board. You can't leave them behind and then just drive it top down. That's not going to happen. You have to involve everyone as part of it. You will fail multiple times. You will be made fun of. But I think that's where you need to lead with.
So Trista, Vikas talked about, the Eco Warrior program. I think it was in a UAE school. Kanak talked about his Sanskar and Sanskriti and some of the other things that you're doing in tier 2, tier 3. Tell me honestly, all of this is good to have after the must-have of marks and college admissions, right? Can really any school builder and operator right now disregard marks and college admissions from the equation? And is that even a worthwhile aspiration or pursuit? Or it really is about having that at the core and then building around it?
And I mean, you're making it very simplistic, Shashi, and it's really not. But it's not, I wouldn't say marks, I would say rigor. And rigor is always important. And schools need to focus on building rigor, some amount of structure, some amount of predictability. And then there is freedom, then there's unstructured. So how do you balance both of it out? So it's very simplistic to say marks versus passion, or those two are not the way parents are thinking now. Parents are different from even what I saw 10 years ago. Families are changing. Homeschooling numbers have gone up. So they've rejected what is considered quote unquote traditional or marks oriented or some kind of school system. And parents are looking at something different. They're more nuclear families. Their family ethos is evolving, right? So, most parents, they might have come from the IITs and IIMs, and then they say, I just want my child to be a good citizen, to do something good. And so now we're coming back to the basics of what does that really mean? And it doesn't always mean marks. It doesn't always mean getting into the top college. And we don't know what college is going to look like even a couple of years from now, right? From the higher ed space. So we have to rethink even the paradigm of what K-12 should look like and what are the learning experience we have to think about in
No,
India context.
I'm glad all three of you see, more positive about change and transformation afoot and parents accepting. Now let's come to parents. Couple of interesting insight. I'm just going to focus on two, and then we take some audience questions before we go to teachers. I think two things that stood out to me. The parents in the report place an enormous trust in school reputation, boards, and rankings. At the same time, student experience is often more mixed. How does reputation begin to replace reality in school decision making? And I'll tell you a data point again that was really interesting, right? 77% of parents chose school based on reputation and rankings, but their children, only 33% of students felt their school offers more than the schools their friends go to, right? Friends of cousins go to. So, the lived reality of the student as opposed to how the parent has made the decision is very different. That's one. And I'm going to take the second one, that only a minority of parents actually participate meaningfully in school life beyond the mandatory meetings. Yet many more want influence on academic policies and programs. How do schools interpret this gap between desire for voice and actual engagement?
So, Shesi, I think that's very interesting. You need to engage parents all the year round, right from the entry level. You cannot just have the mandatory meetings to showcase that the child is doing very well, and then I say this on a light-hearted manner. Anyone who's an educator in India does not know anything about education. It's everyone else who knows everything about it. That happens because you don't engage the parents all the year round. You engage and involve them only during the PTMs. Then they don't have much understanding as to what you are doing and the agency towards it as well. So that is the starting point of it. We've seen that when a child comes to us, we have like very elaborate forms for the parents to fill in and just to understand them, and we have conversations with them which are very deep, which is not just about that your child can get into this school and secure the marks and you come from a particular social background or not. Like, those things are not important. The conversations are not about the school. The conversations are about the child and as to what their synergy with the school is. Those are the important things, not just to showcase that I have a very fancy sports infrastructure or I have very fancy labs and I also have books branded with AI integrated. Like, those are very generic and unfortunately marketing gimmicks that don't work. You have to be true to your purpose as to what you're doing with the school. We believe that parents are true partners in the teaching learning process. We involve them in everything that we do. And it's not just about having support from the parents, but we take the criticism as well. It's very much like the stereotypical end of the year conversation that people have with their employees, right? Like, I think that I've done all the work, but my boss thinks I've not done anything. Similarly, the parent thinks that, the school's not done anything, I have done everything. Therefore, continuous communication with the parents.
By the way, the parents seem happier with schools than students do. I mean, I think that's the one line TLDR. Most parents we poll put their youngest children in the same school. And I think that obviously, of course, there are convenience factors, but I think that really is a demonstration of some level of satisfaction that shows. Because, the parent engagement problem, right? Are there sort of global differences? You said that you get a lot of responses from India and Brazil, right? What is optimal level of parent engagement? Because I think in India, especially in the premium schools where parents as customers has become one thing, I have gone to parent-teacher meetings where I feel like, you can't ask the teacher to ensure your child eats vegetables that they never eat at home, right? But I think, kind of an almost unfair expectation from what the school and the teachers and classrooms can do for parents. So, they're both sort of on both ends of the spectrum. So any guidance on what is optimal engagement?
I think it's a blessing to have engagement. There's many parts of the world where parents don't really engage. And so the fact that you've got the opposite going on in India, I think is a good thing, first and foremost. Parents paying interest, I think is a great thing. The larger question that you're posing, I think, is more important, which is, what are the signals that come closest to capturing real school quality, I think is what you're asking. And the way I think about it is like, I think the best indicator, and even from my own experience as a parent, where schools that are great is where kids want to go because they engage students with meaningful real world learnings, support their well-being and promote a strong sense of community and responsibility. Um, and one of the biggest things that we've touched on in terms of signals that you send is school culture. Again, I come back to that. Because it's the key determining factor when it comes to attracting and retaining the best teachers and leaders, and therefore has a direct impact on teaching quality. And again, a direct impact on the culture in which students are learning. And so when we think about the real differentiator when it comes to academic excellence, it can be found in what educators call the hidden curriculum. These are the unspoken, implicit values and norms that make up a school's organizational culture. And so that's how I think about this very blessed problem that you have that you're experiencing in India. But the signals that I would suggest that people look at are broader than what just the grades are.
Yes. Trista, one of the first parts of another insight that I shared was around parents' decision making being on rankings and reputation, right? And the school brand, and their children's experience not living to that reality or the belief that parents have that this is a great school. What are you seeing, especially with new schools that you're coming up, which might not be brands immediately, right? And in a way, parents self-select themselves because there's a cultural resonance with some of the themes that you're talking about, right? How do you navigate, the rankings and reputation game with parents?
We have chosen not to participate in it. The only ranking and rating we've ever done is Vikas's World's Best School because of the integrity, the high standard that exists, and the learning that it brings to schools that participate in it. And I believe India has a long way to go in making fair, clear, and trustworthy ranking, rating, accreditation systems. And I think we've begun the process. We have a long way to go. So I don't know what parents are relying on in India, and I think we have to think twice and thrice about these rating systems that exist.
Yeah. For sure. Last two questions from me, and then I'm going to take two questions from the audience as we wrap up the next 10 minutes. We're at 5:49. What is the one change, and this is a question for all of you, and short, quick answers would be great. What is the one change schools know they need to make, but hesitate to make because it might be unpopular with parents, boards, or rankings? Kanak, what scares you? What change do you know you should be doing, but you haven't done?
Remove the administrative tasks given to teachers. I wish, if I could remove it, I would remove all of it and let them focus on personal growth, their personal learning and teaching, learning in the classroom. But unfortunate reality is that they are too much engrossed in administrative tasks as well.
To separate administration to teaching, right? Where teachers are doing everything from organizing form morning sports days, blood donation camps to everything else. We haven't been able to get to teachers, which is a whole, webinar on its own. That I just wanted to stay focused on students. Trista, what is the one change schools know they need to make but don't because they're worried about what parents, boards, or rankings will?
I think schools should put a lot more effort in celebrating teachers and really looking at the real heroes in this ecosystem because everything rests on teachers. So I think schools need to celebrate that. As a society, we need to think of them very differently and put them on a pedestal. And literally, if you could force parents to behave a particular way towards their child's teacher, that's something schools should do. Because do not take any looking down on a teacher, do not take any behavior that's unacceptable towards a teacher. I think we should protect our teachers and celebrate them.
Yeah, violations of bad behavior towards it. I remember my mom when I was so like multiple decades back, for parent teachers meeting, they would wear a nice crisp sari to go. It was a formal event where they'd be a little bit scared of the teacher, right? To now, where in many schools you say that parents really do make it very tough on the teachers. I feel teachers have obviously so much to do. Because what is the one change schools should
I've
do?
got so much to say to you, actually. Trista, I love you even more.
Yeah.
The thing is that it's ironical, isn't it? Like the country that gave the word guru today just does not value the teacher. I mean, that's the irony of it. But come back to your question, actually, what you're asking, and like I can tell you from my interactions with schools in India, is the one change I think that needs to happen in India in particular is school owners and promoters need to trust their school principals and give them autonomy more than they do. I think it'd be fair to say in my interactions with school principals in India, they cannot make one decision on their own.
Got it. Last question from me, and again, quick responses. We'll start with you, Vikas, and go the other way. If you could just realign one part of the school system to better serve students over the next decade, right? What would you choose, and what would you be willing to let go of? So, if you were to redesign the calendar, the school timetable, what?
I would overinvest in teacher professional development every day.
Okay, Kanak.
Well, I would build schools that listen rather than just talk.
Yeah, Krista.
I think same as Vikas, focus on the real people.
But I have to say the data on teacher PD is again super depressing, honestly. I think school leaders here have a lot to account for, and I think have to take on the accountability. That's a great moment of sync in the report, and please go through that section. We had a whole section on trying to figure that out. Teachers feel like they don't get enough PD. When they do get PD, it's not relevant or effective. Students and parents don't think teachers are trained enough and feel like they just lecture from the stage, don't know how to use tech, and so on and so forth. So I think PD is yet, people like us who try and sell PD programs, setting up full academies for PD to school leaders, find it to be a really, really uphill task on this one. I have some pitching and selling experience trying to get this done, and it still seems like it doesn't happen, right? And this is still in the top school. So if there's one thing that I'm really bearish about is more PD, better PD, right? Really sort of being unleashed at the mass and intensity that is needed. I'm going to take two questions from the audience now. How effectively are you? I'm going to take one from Garima, and then I'll take one from Mrityunjay and Jay. How effectively are you able to help parents move beyond perceived notions of quality education, especially when such perceptions result in demands that conflict with the core idea of learning to learn? How real is the threat of parents exercising school choice if their needs are not pandered to? I think that's a great question. How do you advocate with parents? How do you change parents' perceptions and markers of success? Krista and Kanak.
There's not much to be done if a parent doesn't feel aligned to a school. I think the problem is already off our plate if a parent comes to that situation. I think there are multiple markers beforehand when we know something is going off. It doesn't just come to us as a surprise, right? So there are multiple ways that a parent will indicate, and it's always an open conversation. You have to bring the parent, make them understand why, how. And so I think if it comes to the very end, there's very little to be done, but there's a lot to be done before that. And parents are understanding, and they really can see value when you have those conversations.
Tarak, how tough is it or possible is it to change parents' perception and markers of success?
Near impossible if they are stubborn about it. Like Krista said, that right at the start, if you can get into it and have like an open communication, the possibility is there because they would want to listen, they would want to change, and I think the change is happening in a lot of places. But if you go at it at the end, it's nearly an impossibility. Also, I've realized that word of mouth is very important in schooling. As to the perception of the parent comes a lot from their peers as well. So society being a very important stakeholder is there. You need to have your voice going out as well. We can do as much as we can internally, but we need to have that voice going out as well as to what you stand for, and not be embarrassed about it as well. So yeah, it's very difficult, but you need to do it.
Got it. A question from Ritinjay, which I think is at the kind of nub of the motivation and success markers that we talked about. He's essentially saying, one second, the question is above the one. As I grew up, career progression meant social and financial well-being. Getting into IIT was obviously a step on the ladder. Now, the real question is if focusing on next step is an issue, how can we defer the crazy focus on meeting the needs of the higher education and entry requirements and focus on actually educating? I mean, actually, that is really at the core of all of this. What really are, and because here come in, we talk so much about, industry, World Economic Forum reports, all of the new skills of the era, everything that's going to happen, jobs that will be taken away. Yet, this next entry point really becomes a milestone that is very tough to navigate around. What are true pathways for a large number of students to choose if they had to focus on just educating and not meeting the higher ed entry requirements?
I would ask the provost of a university that question.
No, come on, Vikas.
No, I'd ask her first.
Yeah, but that's true. That's true, Trista. How do you behave differently at
I'm generally very optimistic for India and the India story. I think higher education is seeing a sea change. The kind of universities that are being built will no longer need the same kind of entry requirements that even currently exist. The next 5-year horizon looks very different, and I think there are more and more opportunities. The number of students entering, say, the commerce or the humanities fields have just jumped up in just the last couple of years. So I think parents are also seeing value. The kind of jobs that are out there are different. So I'm overall optimistic. Definitely right now we are exam oriented in terms of your NEET or JEE or your CLAT, or we are abbreviation heavy.
Well, there's an exam for it in India, NMAT, NEET, ZAT,
Exactly.
all kinds.
But I think universities are changing, the landscape is changing, and the kind of courses that we will need and the kind of way we should prepare our students is continuing to change. So I'm very optimistic of the future.
Okay, on that optimistic note, looking at the future, I'm going to bring this discussion to an end. Thank you very much to all three of my wonderful panelists for joining us. Thank you to the audience who was so engaged, asked so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. As a reminder, please do download the Student Sync Index 2026. It's around 50 pages. I assure you that it will provide some food for thought and hopefully some ideas and how you could do things differently. So I'd love for all of you to read it. Please send us good feedback as well as what we could do better as we continue to stay committed to really understanding what we need to do for students, parents, and schools to be much more in sync. With that, thank you everyone for joining us again.
Thanks, Chelsea. Congratulations on the report. It's very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Vikas. Bye, Trishta.
Bye, Vikas.